Good morning, friends. This morning session is dedicated to class 11, poem number 4, Childhood, by Markus Natten. Yes, in a nutshell, let me tell you central idea. The poet is obsessed with the loss of his childhood. His loss of childhood and stepping into the world of adulthood was a gradual process. The poet is nostalgic and obsessed with the loss of his childhood. His loss of childhood and his entering into adulthood was a gradual process. The poem describes the growth of individuality. The poem describes the growth of individuality, rationality, and the ability to see through the hypocrisy of adulthood. What does this poem in childhood describes? The childhood, the poem Childhood, written by Markus Nettel, describes the growth of individuality, rationality, and the ability to see through the hypocrisy of the adulthood. So let us now talk about, first of all, before going into the details of the all the stanza, four stanza, first of all you ask, sir, what does the first stanza deals with? Well, the first stanza deals with rationalism, logical thinking. When the child poet starts thinking logically, that means he is not influenced by any else decision, and he has the ability to distinguish between good and bad, and he starts thinking scientifically and logically. Then he realizes that perhaps he has lost his childhood. The second stanza uh, talks about the hypocrisy. That means when the child is able to see through the hypocrisy of the adulthood. Ask, sir, what is hypocrisy of the adulthood? Well, what the adults preach, they do not actually practice them. They always talk about loving the children. They say that we should love the children, we should always nurture them with love and affection, but in practicality, what they preach, they don't practice. This is called dual character. This is called hypocrisy. So when the poet is able to see through the hypocrisy of the adulthood, he realizes that he has now entered into the adulthood. Perhaps his childhood is lost, his childish innocence is gone. And then you ask that what does the stanza number 3 deals with? Stanza number 3 deals with individuality. What is individuality? When your own thoughts are your own, that you are not influenced by anybody's decision or anybody's opinion. When your opinions are independent, when you start thinking independently about any issue, and when you develop the ability to take a decision yourself without being influenced by other, that is what we call individuality. So I summarize once again. Stanza 1 deals with rationalism, stanza 2 deals with hypocrisy, stanza 3 deals with individuality, and stanza 4 is just a conclusion, when the poet declares that perhaps his innocence has disappeared to an unknown or forgotten place, but that his innocence can be seen on the face of a newly born child, an infant. Now, line by line, and just stanza wise. In the first stanza, the poet talks about his obsession of his loss of childhood. He's quite nostalgic and obsessed with the, what you call it, loss of his childhood. The poet himself is very much obsessed and nostalgic about the loss of his childhood. He says that exactly he has now started realizing that perhaps he has lost his childhood. And why he is saying like that, and before he makes any observation, he has made several speculation about this loss of his childhood. He makes different speculation. He realizes that the process of attaining adulthood and the loss of childhood, both are gradual process. It involves different stages of growth. The poet makes a guess in the second stanza. He says that perhaps when he became 11 years old, perhaps that time he has started realizing that he has lost his childhood. So when did the poet really realize that he has lost his childhood? At the age of 11. When he ceased to be 11, he crossed the age of 11, he realized that perhaps he has lost his childhood, and he just declared that heaven and hell are the words which existed only in the mind, in the imagination. in the reality they don't exist. What the people said about heaven and hell, that is only imagination. It existed only in the mind of the people. It doesn't have, the hell and heaven doesn't have any geographical existence. It didn't exist in the book of geography. And therefore the poet was able to distinguish between truth and imagination, reality and fiction. And that is the stage when he has seized 11. Now in the next stanza, the poet has developed an ability to see through the hypocrisy of the adulthood. He understands that what the adults preach, they don't practice. They often preach that we should nurture the children with love and affection, we should sow the children with love and affection, but they actually preach this, but in practicality they don't really practice the what they preach. That is what we call hypocrisy. So the poet realizes that perhaps when he is able to see through the hypocrisy of the adulthood, this is the stage when he has now entered into the stage of adulthood. Perhaps he has moved towards one step ahead towards adulthood. And the stanza 3, that is individuality and the loss of childhood. He is talking about developing individuality. The poet says that, well, now he has entered into the stage where he is not being influenced by anybody's decision. His decisions are his own. He realizes that his mind is his own. He is not affected by anybody's decision. He is able to take his own decision independently, and he is able to make out the sense and make out the meaning of what he wants to do in life. He is not influenced by anybody's opinion and ideas. His ideas are his own, and therefore he says that now as he has developed individuality, he has entered into the world of adulthood, and perhaps his childhood has been lost. And in the final stanza he concludes by saying that perhaps his childhood has disappeared to an unknown place, and it can be rediscovered on the face of a newly born child, that is on an infant. And before we conclude, let us discuss one question. Yeah, what is the poet nostalgic about, or what does the poet think about? What is the in the poem Childhood, what is the poet's feeling towards childhood? Well, the poet is obsessed, nostalgic about his loss of childhood. He says that a child is neither hypocrite nor manipulative. Therefore, during childhood, he is not able to distinguish between truth and imagination, reality and fiction. So childhood is a period of innocence, and loss of childhood means loss of innocence, and that is what the poet concludes by saying. So once again, I just tell you, stanza 1 deals with rationalism. Now the logical thinking the poet has developed, and that is how he says that he has lost his childhood. The stanza 2 deals with hypocrisy, when the poet is able to see through the hypocrisy of the adults, and then what they preach they don't practice. And then the stanza 3 deals with the individuality, independent thinking that the child poet or the poet has developed, and he is no more influenced by anybody's opinion and decision. That is how we conclude the poem Childhood. Thank you very much. Have a nice day ahead.